What's up, everyone? It's Spencer from the Fantasy Files, and today I am going to convince you to read a book, series, trilogy, and that is the Threadlight Trilogy by Zack Argyle. This review accompanies a larger discussion we just had with the author of this series. So if you've already read the series, you can watch this to give me the view, please, and then go over to watch the big discussion. If you haven't read the whole thing, no worries. There will be no spoilers here, but also in the bigger discussion, you have about an hour of spoiler-free discussion with Zach. We go off topic and talk about TV shows, video games, and other stuff, as well as more interview type questions about Zach's journey as an author and how he came up with the idea for the Threadlight trilogy. This review will focus on Voice of War since that's the entry to the trilogy, but I will also make some comments on what you can expect from the trilogy moving forward. If you haven't yet, please hit those like and subscribe buttons. I need it. Not only will it help you see our videos when they get posted, but it also keeps Gabe fed while he searches for a way out of my basement. I'm not explaining it here. Go watch the big discussion. You'll get it. We also have a Discord and Twitter linked below if that interests you. All right, on to the review. So this is one of those rare instances where the back of the book summary does a really good job of explaining what's going on. So I'm going to read that and then I'll make some comments on it. While preparing for the birth of his first child, Chris Valerian is tasked with uncovering the group responsible for a series of missing Threadweavers, those able to see and manipulate Threadlight. With each failure, the dark voice in his head grows louder, begging to be released. A young girl from a secret city in the Feywild veers off course to explore the streets of Alkea, never expecting that her journey would end in chains. Far in the deserts to the south, a young man's life changes after he dies. When Chris learns who is responsible for the missing Threadweavers, they come for him and his family. He must do everything in his power to protect those he loves, even if it means trusting strangers, or worse, the growing voice in his mind. Together, these three will change the world, whether they intend to or not. So first we have this guy, Chris Valerian, and he is one of my favorite fantasy parents, if not for sure my favorite. He's up there with Clay Cooper from The Kings of the Wild, as well as another character where it would be spoilery to say if they're a parent, but they're one of my favorites. I'm sure you can figure out who. But he is the High General of the Alkaean military, and it's his job to take his crew and investigate these people called Blood Thieves, who are stealing blood from Threadweavers for their own ends. We also learn that Chris is known as the Apogee. During the war, he was known to have completely let loose and decimate anyone in his path, but now that he's back at home in Alkea, he still has this voice in his head wanting to take over and kill and destroy. And the big question is whether it is something that is part of him from what he saw and experienced in the war, or if it's something else entirely. So as Chris is investigating the Blood Thieves, he finds a girl named Laurel. And I actually forgot to mention this in our big discussion, but I very much picture her as Aloy from the Horizon games. I feel like they're really similar characters, and you all know that I love Aloy, so Laurel was definitely one of my favorites. But she's from a tribe in the Feywild, which is basically a Ferngully type place, if you're old enough to remember what that is, or at least that's how I pictured it. And she is more or less addicted to Threadlight and aching for adventure outside of her village in the Feywild. She gets caught by some of these blood thieves and encounters Chris when he kicks in the door. I won't spoil that any further because then that's kind of taking us beyond the first couple chapters, but I really, really liked her, especially in the first book. There's another character named Alvarax, who's kind of our charming rogue type character, at least at the beginning. But if I remember correctly, he gets introduced quite a bit later in the first quarter of the book. So I really don't want to give too much away with him. But he's a character that I really, really loved. Alvarax is really cool because he's one of those characters, much like Laurel, where you'll go back and forth on liking them or being disappointed in them. Sometimes they make really, really terrible decisions, but you always understand why they're making those decisions. And even though you can't agree with their actions, you at least can sympathize with them on some level. Like the description says, Chris catches the eye of these blood thieves and they start to hunt him down to steal his child. And the cool thing about this is there are characters that you wouldn't expect to be working with the blood thieves. So it really feels like you don't know who to trust, who's in on the whole racket, and it leads to one of the best scenes in the whole trilogy. That being said, I'm sure we can all imagine that these characters kind of end up in the same circle for various reasons, and they may not all agree with each other. But basically, there's this whole conspiracy behind the blood thieves, and his son is more or less at the center of it. So they kind of go on the run to get to safety. So you're probably wondering, like, what Threadlight is. Like, what is this magic system? And Zack talks about this more in our big discussion, so definitely go check that out. But I saw a lot of Mistborn and Lightbringer influences here. It has the pushing and pulling of Mistborn, as well as some other unique features, but also has the whole color thing from Lightbringer. You need to be able to see light during your casting of it. And there are various like chromats and achromats, that kind of language, like in Lightbringer. But everything in this world has what's called a core thread, which reaches down into the earth. It's essentially your center of gravity. If you're a sapphire thread weaver, you can push on that thread to send you up into the air. If you're an emerald thread weaver, you can pull on other things to pull yourself closer to it, like in Mistborn, or like I thought of like Spider-Man. There's some other things that kind of get introduced later on, but that's about the basics of it. That's all you really need to know for now. The cool thing about this magic system is mostly it's all movement based. So you can't just be good at magic to win fights in this world, and it'll help you in certain circumstances, but it's mostly for traversal and kind of moving around and bringing things closer to you or further away from you, which means that you still need to be able to use a sword or whatever weapon of choice if you want to survive any battles. And I thought that was really cool. Much like Mistborn, the magic kind of stacks on top of each other with each book, gradually getting a little bit more complex with increasingly more creative ways to use the actual thread weaving. Magic is a huge part of this society. Most, if not all, of the nobility are thread weavers. It's very much a sign of status, and families in Alkea are only allowed 2 children, both of which could be achromat, meaning a non-thread weaver. They can have a third, which they can keep if the child is a sapphire or emerald, but if the child is achromatic, that child is blinded and taken to be a priest of Alcaeus. It was really cool to see how in every society in the trilogy, they all have their own views and mythos surrounding the magic, and it makes you realize that one city doesn't have all the answers to, you know, where this magic came from or how it should be employed, or like what it means to be someone who is one of these thread weavers. And I just felt like that gave us so many viewpoints on the subject, so you're not just seeing everything from like one hero's point of view or like one country's point of view. Okay, so now that I've info dumped all over you, that didn't come out right. But now that you know what's going on, let me tell you why you should read this trilogy. I think one of the greatest things about this series is the level of polish. It's not a massive story like Stormlight or a dozen other big epic fantasies, but what it gives you is a very solid, clear story that is easy to be grounded in. Everything that happens makes sense for this world. Every character is very well developed, and the magic works really well within its own system. Story aside, the covers are absolutely gorgeous, especially in hardcover. I've seen them on people's shelves and I want them so bad. And if you're an audiobook listener like me, the narrator Adam Gold is one of the best narrators I've ever heard. He just has a voice that is so sultry and you just want to like keep listening to it. I don't know what he looks like, but probably something like this. Not to mention, you can get the entire trilogy for 1 credit on Audible, which is absolutely insane. It's never been a better time to check out this trilogy. The barrier for entry for Voice of War is extremely low, meaning that I would feel comfortable handing this book to someone who's never read fantasy, and it's very likely that they would enjoy it and become a fan of the genre. It's a perfect gateway. After the first book, each installment grows with the reader, gradually teaching them bits of lore and giving them one more curveball to the magic system. If you're a new fantasy reader, I would think that by the time you finish this trilogy, you'd be ready to read something like Mistborn or Lightbringer, or maybe Stormlight if you're really dedicated. However, it also works both ways, because even if you've read like 200 fantasy books like Gabe and I have, you will absolutely not be bored or anything during this story. The characters are so good. There's a solid mystery, especially in the first book. You're always going to be wondering what happens next. And the magic system is really, really great. It just really works no matter what kind of experience you have with the fantasy genre. There's an equal amount of deep character interactions, suspense, incredible reveals that will blow your mind, fantastic fight scenes and action sequences. The story itself really takes off to a new level in the second book, and the third is a full throttle race to the finish line. The characters grow in ways that I didn't expect, and some of the side characters get bigger roles and become some of my favorite characters. All around, this is a fantastic read. You will absolutely enjoy yourself. I guarantee it. Go support this author. He does a ton of charitable stuff in the self-published fantasy community. It's really, really admirable. And you can find out more about that in our, you guessed it, our big discussion episode. Can you tell that I'm trying to shepherd you into our long form content? It's not a big deal. It's like 2 hours. Go on a long drive, go on a hike, you athletic hippie, and listen to the sultry voices of Gabe, Zach, and myself. And for the love of God, subscribe while you're at it. Did I fuck up the mic? All right. That's all I've got for today. Thanks for checking out my review of the Threadlight Trilogy. Be sure to stick around for more great content like conversations with Craig from the Legendarium, Mike from Mike's Book Reviews. Those are both coming up soon, as well as a whole bunch of Dresden Files stuff coming out in the next few weeks. We also have a Lost Metal episode coming out for Mistborn Era 2, so keep your eyes peeled for that. But not literally. All right, enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll see you in the next video.